Hello and welcome to the Wisepreneurs podcast. My name is Nigel Rawlins and I work with a range of women who are professionals in their field. They're often 50 to 60 years old who want to start their own business. In this podcast, I'll be interviewing a range of guests who will be able to tell you how they've done it themselves, and others who will give you hints and ideas and tips and maybe the confidence you need to go out and start your own business. Well, welcome, Anthea. Thank you for joining me with the Wisepreneurs podcast. I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your life and what's taken you to this point.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, look, thinking about it all, I think I started off studying Buddhism at university. There's a bit of a backstory to that, but we won't go there at the moment. And in a way that is a background that would today not equip you really very well for any sort of career or advancement unless you wanted to be an academic. But what happened to me at university was I fell in love with politics. Mm-hmm. And that love and fascination continues to this day for me. And what that did was I stood for the Students' Representative Council, got made a secretary, and then started to work, if you like, in that sort of arena of politics, student politics, and got myself in front of the chairman of the Public Service Board. I don't remember how I got there, but I did. And I advocated for students who were public servants and they were part-time students to get some time off during orientation week so they could get some sort of orientation to their university course. What happened after that was the man that assisted in that meeting rang me because I was in my last year of uni and said, have you got a job to start in January? And I said, no, I haven't. He said, well, if you want to come in, we'll give you a job.
And this is to the Public Service?
This is to the Public Service Board in Canberra.
Okay.
And I think from that moment on, and with my passion for politics, I got a very strong, passionate burn to make a difference to the world and to the environment I was in. I wanted to make a difference.
At a young age?
At 20. Mm. And I think really that passion, and when I did the hard work during those early years, I was almost so focused that the rest of life just happened. Mm. And doors opened. Now, this is the 70s, and doors did open in the 70s. You'd get asked if you'd like to apply for a job and you'd apply, and you'd probably get the job. That doesn't really happen.
Not anymore.
Anymore. Doesn't really happen anymore. So I had this very privileged period, I look back on it now, where just because I'd been to university and I showed some smarts and I had a bit of intuition and I was passionate about what I was doing, doors just opened. Mm. And the other door that opened through the student politics was I went in front of the Vice-Chancellor at the ANU because that was the era when students were wanting representation on decision-making councils. And a moment in that meeting drove the rest of my career. I went in and I told him what I thought was wrong with the university from a student's point of view. I mean, how precocious is that? But never mind. And this is Sir John Crawford. This is, a very esteemed man in the community. And he looked at me and he said, Miss Green, don't tell me what's wrong. I know what's wrong. Tell me how to fix it.
Wow.
And I have never since gone anywhere and advocated for something if I didn't have a solution or a suggestion. I really took that message on board. And so my career just sort of took off. And at the time, women were just being recognised as coming through. There were not many ahead of me. And to the point of, did I feel discriminated against? Nigel, I didn't. I have actually never felt discriminated against. But then I had this burning passion. I'd learnt that I could articulate ideas very well through my education, and I just went for it. And whatever I saw needed to be done, or jobs that needed to be doing, and I did them as well as I possibly could. I gave it my all. I worked very hard, and I think I just travel that pathway. And the men along the way, I can remember for many years, I was the only woman in the room. Many years. Still today, sometimes, you're the only woman in the room. And I can remember at the very beginning, the men looking at me as if to say, well, what's she going to do? Who is she? Why is she at the table? Not in a discriminatory way, in an almost inquisitive. It was inquisitive. They were quite inquisitive.
So they were open.
They were open, yeah.
So
now, was I lucky to find a series of groups of organisations had men that were open-minded? Yes, I probably was very lucky. One in particular, I took a job at the Canberra College of Advanced Education on doing training programs for public servants who needed to understand policy and policy decision-making. My boss then was Dr. Geoffrey Hawker, again a famous Australian, and he was totally open-minded, looking back at that era. So we're talking the late 70s. I had one child and I was having a second child. I could work the hours I needed to work. It was a flexible environment. I could bring the children to work. I mean, that was unheard of. I can remember my children being under my desk, having a sleep in a bassinet, and he was just totally open to that. So how lucky was I at that era? I have a sort of belief these days that, and I try and give this to people when I'm mentoring or coaching, if you are passionate about what you do, and if you've done the hard work, and if you put it out there what your goals are, serendipity will start to take its place in your journey.
If you're getting out there.
If you're getting out there. Yeah, you've got to get the message out there. You can't sit in your lounge room and say, well, I want to be the head of whatever. That won't get you anywhere. You've got to get out there, tell your story, be seen, be doing the good work. So, yeah, that's the story. So the rest of my career was the first CEO job I got just at the beginning of mid-80s, was again, someone said, look, there's a job up in Sydney running a health planning organisation. Are you interested? And off I went. After that, I became a CEO then, an executive director of that small organisation. And once you get that role, it gets easier and easier really to stay in those roles because you've got the experience. So that lead up to that first chief executive officer role was really quite charmed, I have to say, when I look back. After that, things got a bit harder, and when I then went on to run a number of organisations that were healthcare. I got an expertise in hospitals and healthcare and running organisations that deliver healthcare or deliver aged care or deliver disabilities. They're all very similar. And in the later part of the journey, I had to work hard to get jobs sometimes because I changed geography, changed the threads I was interested in, and then I learnt how hard it can be, even with somebody that's competent and has qualifications, to actually get the job you're looking for, and how you have to have the tenacity to just, A, do you have to reinvent yourself to present yourself in a more modern way? B, do you have to highlight things that you previously haven't to match the sort of pitch that they're giving you as to who they're looking for? And C, do you have to really market yourself in a way that you'll get yourself to an interview? I always felt if I could get myself to an interview, I probably had a pretty good chance of convincing people I could add something to their organisation. So again, I guess I come back to the fire in the belly and the passion to make a difference and contribute to the community and contribute to people's lifestyles and contribute to their health in particular when I worked in the health arena. So that's a very shortened version of a long career.
And what was the last position you had before you decided to retire?
Oh, well, therein is another story. Okay. I retired about twice, and I probably still haven't, to be frank. So I was running an organisation called Australian Hearing, which was 172 million turnover by the time I left it. And I decided then, so I would have been about 63, that the edge was coming off my performance. My memory wasn't quite as good as it was. My energy levels were beginning to drop. It was a very big job, and I thought I need to downscale, ready to retire. So I took a job, applied for and got a job running the Shepherd Centre in Sydney, which is a very small, almost going from chalk to cheese, very small, but I felt passionate about the organisation. It was an early intervention program for hearing impaired children to get them to be able to speak so that they could get to school and engage in schooling as a normal child would. That was a huge adjustment, going from an organisation that had money and resources to a very tiny organisation that was struggling for money and resources. And then at that point, my husband and I decided to move to Melbourne. When I'd finished at the Shepherd Centre, I looked for directorships on boards, got a couple down here in Melbourne. One of them was a private investor who owned 9 nursing homes, and I went on that board. Cut a long story short, I ended up chairman, then we got rid of the CEO, and then I ended up the CEO. So here's my next job.
So what age were you at this?
So at this stage, I would have been 66, 67.
So still working?
Still working.
And that's full-time?
And that was absolutely full-time. Yeah, that was a big job. And I did that for a couple of years. The organisation had its head office in Melbourne because that's where the investment funds came from. But the rest of the organisation was in New South Wales and Queensland. So I was travelling an enormous amount. And I broke my ankle on the way to the gym. And I couldn't do the flying. So they put me back on the board and put someone in as CEO. And then I stayed on the board. We ended up selling the entities and the investors did very well out of it. So then I was on other boards. So by this stage, so that CEO role stopped. I joined some other boards and I've only just parted ways with my last board about 6 months ago.
Right.
Yeah. But of course, as you know, and you helped me,
Yes.
I've set up my own little venture here that
Yes.
isn't monetarised, but is taking a lot of time. And I have to say, I'm 72 now and I'm finding time as difficult to manage now as I did when I was working full time when I was in my full flight, but
Yes.
for different reasons.
Well, I wanted to have a little talk about some of those things. So can we just go back a bit? At one stage, you had a young family and
Yes.
you were getting all these positions. How did you cope with having a family and that sort of work? And as you said, you had a young child under the desk at one of the positions.
Yeah. Well, again, somewhere in my psyche as a young woman, I just had the view that I could do whatever I put my mind to doing.
Right.
And I didn't see children as an impediment to that. I just saw it that I'd have to be better organised and so on. And I was very lucky, as I said earlier, I had this boss who enabled me to be free-flowing, if you like, about childminding and my job. He knew I would do my job. He absolutely knew me and he knew I'd do my job and I absolutely did do the job, but I could do it at my own time and pace. That got me to the next stage of my career and I actually parted from my husband at that point and went to Sydney. How did I manage? Nigel, looking back, I sometimes wonder how I managed, but I managed that career, 13 years of it, as a single parent.
And raising children.
And raising two boys, yes. I was lucky enough to be at a level where I had the income to be able to afford some childminding, and some of it was more affordable then than it is today. My ex-husband would take the children every second weekend, which gave me a break. I had, on the journey through, a couple of girlfriends that would occasionally help out if I got stuck with sickness or something. And when my first son was born, I had a wonderful Spanish family that looked after him. And then I just found a woman who was very committed to looking after my boys, and she almost became part of the family. But the secret to it all was planning and a bit of a pattern of life. I won't call it a routine, but I'll call it a pattern of life. Pardon me. So the boys knew how the week would run, and how it would all go. And, you know, without being viciously regimented, life had a rhythm. And the rhythm, I think, helped us keep everything going. And through the bits of it, and still to this day, I sort of do this. When I cook something, I cook twice as much as I need and put it away in the fridge for a homegrown takeaway, if you like. I still do that to this day. I would cook every Sunday and I'd put layers of food in the freezer ready for the week so that we come home and there's spaghetti bolognese or whatever is needed.
And working full time and working senior executive job.
Yeah. And the other thing I did was I made Friday night everyone's night to relax. So we would go out for pizza or pasta or whatever. Friday night was a night out. And interestingly enough, when I married my current husband, we both had very full-on careers. And I'd seen a couple over in America who had really, they travelled the world and yet they had a really vibrant and loving relationship. And I said to them, how do you keep all this together? And she said to me, it doesn't matter where we are in the world. We try and join each other for Friday night and we have a date night. Because you cannot talk to each other for a week. And you can live in the same house and not talk to, I don't mean not talk to each other, but I mean not talk to each other about, you know, the deeper, more important things that you probably should talk to your partner about. So my husband and I did that too for a very long time. So that's, I think with children, the other thing I do, and I say this to all working women, I made holidays part of every year and I made sure that the holidays were nice and that we went somewhere where I didn't have to do all the cooking and the cleaning and everything. And they had me 24/7. And all of us remember the holidays more than we remember the working week and the working year. Yeah.
So your children are now grown up, obviously.
Yes.
And now you've sort of retired. You've started off your new business. Let's talk about that for now. So you've started up Women Who Stand Up. So tell me about that.
So, well, I guess you and Meredith were very instrumental in this. I got to 70. I got to 70 and I came to your workshop.
Yeah, I've only ever done 2 workshops.
Okay,
so.
well, and I found that very inspiring because what you were both saying was if you want to keep working or if you want to do something different or if you want to self-realise, later in life, do it. There's no reason why you can't do it. And I think that's a really important message. And again, I think the same thing. You've got to have a bit of passion and a bit of fire and a bit of energy to do it. It doesn't have to be the same as it was way back there when. But so I think that session with you and Meredith probably gave me the confidence to really explore that idea.
No, this is a lady saying that to me who used to be the general manager of the Sydney Women's Hospital. And you felt you lacked a bit of confidence.
Yes, I did. Yeah, because I was 70.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I felt...
So when you were younger, you didn't lack that confidence?
Oh, look, to say that I didn't lack confidence is glossing over some really bad moments in my career. Yeah. Yes, we all have self-doubt. Part of my driving engine is to do things extremely well. And some of that comes from self-doubt, that I'm not good enough to do that. So some of what drives me, Nigel, is I can do that and I can do it very well and I'm going to. So that's not that there isn't self-doubt, there's self-doubt. And as I got into the 70s and really in the late 60s, early 70s, you start to feel the difference in your body, you start to feel the difference in your memory. All those little chinks that I could feel when I started to move from big jobs to smaller jobs were getting a bit stronger. And people around you don't support you when you say I'm 70 and I'm thinking of starting a business or something. They go, what? You've got to be joking,
That's the problem.
And that's the problem.
Yeah.
And then we should never do that to our friends. I think that's not a sign of friendship.
Well, I think that what the issue there is very obvious is it's the wrong group to talk to about it. Yes, it is the wrong group. And that's why you and Meredith, came at a point, pivotal point. And this I've come back to that point of serendipity.
serendipity plays a role, but you've got to sort of have the vibes out there to help it along. So
and to obviously be ready for
and to be ready for it, exactly.
And you found it.
Yeah, exactly right. And the Buddhists have a saying, when the pupil's ready, the teacher will arrive. And I think that's a beautiful way of putting it, that when you're ready to hear, there's probably lots of teachers out there, but when you're ready to hear and listen and take in, then the teacher will arrive. And I'm eternally grateful to you and Meredith, because you just lit the spark,
Thank you.
that lit the fire.
Yeah. I'm not too sure what we did that did that, but it was
I think the pupil was ready, and I think the teachers had arrived, and you were selling and are selling, and you're living a very important message, which is age is not the point. Age is not the point.
No.
The point is, are you committed? Have you got the energy? Have you got the will or the need? And if you have, yes, you can make a contribution for as long as all of that holds together for you.
And how can we help?
How can we help? Exactly. And so that's how I started Women Who Stand Up. And of course, Women Who Stand Up is very much about, if you are a woman and you want to stand up and get to positions of power and responsibility, or if you want to move something forward or do something a bit out of the ordinary for yourself, here are some tips, hints, resources, and other people that have lived a life that's taken some different paths. And I think out of storytelling, sometimes we can find inspiration, encouragement, a sense that, yes, if she can do it, I can do it. And that's really what Women Who Stand Up is about, is trying to tell other women's stories and give women any little tips, hints, and information. So I try and keep the website tight. The articles aren't long, but they're just meant to hit a mark on some topic.
And you've chosen some women to highlight, haven't you? So how do you go about selecting them?
Well, that's an interesting question, because while my website's aimed at women in leadership, I'm interviewing a few women who aren't necessarily leaders in the sense of running huge organisations or having been, that they're women who are doing something a bit out of the ordinary, a little bit different, a bit stepping up, or they're leading in a way that's a bit different. So last week I interviewed a woman who is the founder of a website called Afghan Women on the Move. And she's also, a bit like Meredith, a social worker, but also an author, a playwright, and she's written a play called The Good Woman. So I chose her because that is a woman from a difficult culture to come out of, to be a self-realising woman stepping out. And she's obviously stepping out and doing some quite brave things. Bravery and courage feature a lot in my website, because I think bravery and courage are the things we need to step up. And I've interviewed a Vietnamese woman who went from being a refugee to the mayor of Maribyrnong, interested in interviewing Meredith Fuller because she's a leader in her field, both in terms of counselling and in terms of theatre. I mean, she's quite multi-talented and a very interesting mix of talents. So I try and find women who are doing something a little bit different.
But the issue is doing something.
The issue is doing something, that's right.
We had a conversation a while back. You mentioned that when you were younger with children, somebody inspired you. Would you like to tell us about that?
Yes, sure. Golda Meir. I think it was her biography. I think she wrote it about her life. And there was one passage in there where she talks about having the cabinet at her kitchen table because she was bringing up children. So the cabinet in Israel, the cabinet would come to her home. And she had children, and I think she finished the meeting. My memory of the passage in the book was something like she did what she needed to do as Prime Minister, and everyone left. And then she's in the room and the kids have gone to bed, and she goes through this agony about, am I damaging my children? Is this all too high a price to pay for my children? How will I know if they're okay? And I think at this stage her children were still quite young. And then when you finish the book, you realise that the children are actually okay. And the fact that someone had articulated what I thought often to myself. Is the price too high for them? And that really resonated in me. And the fact that she kept going, and she just said, I have to keep going. I can't stop. My children have to come the journey. And that's a good way to put it. And that's how I looked at it. The children came the journey with me. And that's how I've always put it to my boys. This is the journey that I'm on. And I think that was a fundamental moment for me. I've never forgotten. I also followed Hillary Clinton from the beginning, before she was even well known. When Bill Clinton was standing for presidency for the first time, she came to the fore particularly, but I was following her before this, but then a particular moment I remember is, and I didn't necessarily agree with it, but I remembered it, is when she did the interview with Bill after his affairs had been alleged before he was even president, and she made the statement that I'm going to stand by my man. And I just looked at that and I thought, well, personally, that's probably not how I would have felt, but what a brave woman, what a strong stand she made, and it almost sealed his ability to go on then and win the nomination for the candidacy for the Democratic Party. So I followed her quite a lot since then. Unfortunately, when I my love of politics is sort of still coming through all of my life. When I watched her very closely through the 2016 election, I got quite bitterly disappointed because I thought she had an air about her of entitlement. And none of us can go around with an air of entitlement. That just doesn't work.
So she lost a bit of that touch of reality a bit.
Yes, she did. Yeah. And look what happened. I mean, her loss in that election did not surprise me.
And are there other women political leaders that you admire?
I very much admire Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand. I think she'll go down in history as a very important female figure in this century. What she did around the massacre in Christchurch, the way she handled that was with femininity and strength. Enormous empathy for the people that lost their lives and the community that had been so attacked. She gave the perpetrator no airplay. She's never mentioned his name. I can't even remember his name, which is, and that she did that deliberately. That was deliberate. She wasn't going to give him any credence at all. And she went into that community with a cultural sensitivity that was very engaging. And her continued advocacy around gun laws is strong and feminine. That she's just adding this mixture of femininity to strength, which is, to some people might sound a contradiction, but I think actually in this modern era of corporate life we're going into, which is very different to the past, I think those attributes, those more feminine attributes, are going to be more and more important for men and women as they lead countries and organisations.
And I think the whole point is the stories of women in these positions gives us that background that we don't often hear about because it's all about men. So do you think you might be able to interview Jacinda at some point for your podcast?
Pardon?
Would you interview Jacinda Ardern?
I would love to interview Jacinda. And
so somehow we have to make that happen.
Good.
Absolutely.
Yes. No.
We'll reach out.
We'll reach out, yes. And I do have a few links over there. But yes, I would love to. I think she has a very important story to tell, and she had the baby after becoming Prime Minister. I mean, she's living it.
So let's go back to, you're now 72. You've got obviously grown-up children, you've got grandchildren, and you have a mother.
Yes.
So here you are at 72, running a little business, and you've got other obligations. How do you manage it all?
Well, as I said earlier, I'm struggling for time, and it's really interesting. So I guess I've made the decision, my husband and I have made the decision that we want to be engaged grandparents. Between us, we have 5 children. 4 of them have had children. So there's 4 children and 8 grandchildren. And they are all over the place. So they're not even geographically near us. So therein in itself is a commitment to time and energy that we've made that we continue. And my mother is 96, an amazing mixture, my mother, of intense fragility and burning strength. And in her older age now, all the fragility is beginning to show as the strength drains away, which is sad to watch. But she's still determined. And like tonight, I'm taking her to a class on Nietzsche. Oh. Because she still reads and understands and is interested in philosophy. Interestingly enough, I find the time commitments for the family now harder than when I was a single mother. Because as a single mother, you're all living in the same house. I could sort of run the routine and I was spending time with people. But now I've got to fit into other schedules. I've got to travel. I've got to try and make time for mum and make that work. So in many ways, I think it's harder. And I think at 72, Nigel, I am again beginning to feel the encroaching edges of my resilience and my strength just coming away a bit. Like if I get something, I don't pick up as quickly as I used to. If I do a hard gym workout, I don't pick up the energy as quickly as I used to. It's subtle.
It's different.
It's there, and you've just got to work with it. You've just got to say, okay, if I get a bad cold, instead of getting over it in 48 hours, it might take a week. Or, you know, if I do something really hard at the gym or in the garden or whatever I'm doing, it might take a bit longer. You've just got to go with the flow.
I think that's really, really a good point.
And not give up. Don't give up because you're feeling a bit weaker or a bit less of energy. Every now and again I think, I'll just give up. But you can't.
Well, if your mother's 97, you've got to feel more used. And that's going to be the problem is because we're obviously in better health nowadays than any previous generations. And if you've got good genes like you have in your family, and it's, as you said, with our minds and our brains and our bodies, we do have to look after. And you are, from the sounds of it, diet, exercise and pacing yourself. So are there any particular types of work you are looking to do through your Women Who Stand Up? Would you do some consulting or coaching?
I'm looking to doing some coaching. I'm already doing a little bit of coaching. I would do some consulting. And I'm interested in providing some venues and workshops and get-togethers for women to talk to each other about all this in person rather than on the internet. And I'm hoping that we could work on things like confidence, on how do you muster your courage to step up and do something? How do you ask the hard questions when you're in a job? I'm interested in really spending time with women and giving them the inspiration and the pathway forward, if that will help them on their journey.
Fabulous. Well, maybe at that point, is there anything else we haven't talked about that you'd like to mention? Or
I think I never had time to network very much. That was the one thing I let go, and I think it's very important for women to understand the value of networking, but also make sure that the networking is valuable.
That's a good point.
I see a lot of women go to endless lunches and breakfasts, and I wonder, is that really a valuable networking, or is that just a get-together? And I'm not disrespectful of get-togethers; they're very important, but I think it's very important for women to find other women who are on a similar path, who they can share with, and when the chips are down and you've just got to talk to somebody, be able to ring them. Now, in my journey, I've had the odd woman. I don't mean they're odd. I mean there was the occasional woman who could play that role for me, and I still have one in particular I value enormously. She's in New Zealand, but we can talk. But I cannot underestimate the value of women having other women in the similar vein who they can just let it all hang out with, you know. And I also think that women who, like, I had to find another partner, or I ended up finding another partner. One of the great lessons for me in that was from another executive woman who we spent some time talking. She was a Vietnamese in America, an extraordinary businesswoman. And she said to me one day, Anthea, you know, if ever I get married again, it's got to be someone who I can come home at the end of the week and take my makeup off and take the corporate clothes off and lounge on the lounge chair and feel like a blob and exhausted, and he'll still love me.
That's lovely.
And I think that's so true. Yeah, you've got to have someone who'll love you when you're at your lowest ebb, as it were.
Oh, that's lovely. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, it's a pleasure and lovely to talk to you, and I'd love to inspire all the women you're working with.
Oh, lovely. Good. Thank you, then. Thank you for joining me on the Wisepreneurs podcast. I hope you found it both practical and interesting. You can find out more by visiting my website at wisepreneurs.com.au. Thank you again.